Emmett Fox writes, your destiny depends entirely upon your own mental conduct. You may think that you know this already, but if you do not act upon it, it is certain that you do not really know it. Most people would be amazed to discover how much negative thinking they indulge in. Thought is so swift and habit is so strong that unless you are very careful, you will constantly transgress. Suppose that, quite without your knowledge, an invisible dictaphone was strapped on your shoulders the first thing tomorrow. Now, this was written in the 50s, so I'd say instead of dictaphone, say you had one of these miniature tape recorders or digital recorders stuck in your pocket. So I'll try putting it that way. Suppose that, quite without your knowledge, a miniature digital recorder was strapped on your shoulders the first thing tomorrow morning, and you carried it about all day until the last thing tomorrow night. Then suppose that this recording were played over to you so that every word you had uttered for a whole day was repeated to you. Well, if you're an average human being, you would probably be embarrassed. Yet it does really happen that everything we say and think and do is recorded in the subconscious mind. And our daily experience is simply that record being played over to us by the law of being. Never forget that the circumstances of your life tomorrow are molded by your mental conduct of today. And he has these words from Psalm 119. I have chosen the way of truth. Now, one of the jokes here, for those of you who are new, is those of us who do talks, we very seldom look to see what Emmett Fox is going to say for the day. And yet so often, what we're talking about is reflected in what he's saying. And this is one of those cases. So we're going to explore compassion versus empathy, because they are, in fact, it's sort of at loggerheads with each other. But with regard to the spiritual walk, and I'm going to look at it from a Christian standpoint, from the Hindu standpoint, the Baha'i standpoint, and sort of a broader spiritual standpoint, which is what most of us in this church follow. There was a blog that talked about the difference, and I'm going to quote a little bit from it. If you are empathetic, you are an emotional sponge to your environment. Empathetic people experience the feelings of those around them, whether they are human or animal. Empaths actually experience another being's feelings. They don't simply watch from the outside, they feel everything around them, sometimes to the point of overstimulation and exhaustion. Now, it doesn't have to be negative. It's not all negative. It's not just that we walk around and anyone who's upset. That's what an empath grabs onto. If people are exultant, you get that too. So, it's one or the other. Compassion, however, doesn't involve feeling what the other person is feeling. Rather, it's sufficient caring to feel called to, compelled to address what the other person is feeling. If they're joyous, fine, you can be joyous with them. If they're hurting, at the simplest, maybe you offer a hug. It can be, for instance, if someone's died, offering to help take care of the family, make arrangements, hold them when they cry. Yeah, if you're operating out of compassion, you can't just stand by and do nothing. But bear in mind, you're also not suffering. In my walk, I keep encountering people who feel that the most caring thing they can do is suffer the same thing that the other person is suffering. But from my standpoint and this writer's standpoint, that isn't helpful. So one of the differences between compassion and empathy is passive, if you will. You're feeling it, whereas compassion is an active. You can be sympathetic, aware, and caring, and compassionate looking to do something to assist in the alleviation of the situation. Uh, Empathy is an internal feeling. Compassion moves outward. Sympathy is sort of between empathy and compassion, but you're not feeling it. You're just aware of it. It's sort of the difference between when you see someone heartbroken, you feeling heartbroken and sobbing with them, and giving a hug or walking with them while they're grieving. Now, look at it slightly differently. If you're being empathetic, if you are connecting with the distress or the happiness, the joy of others, first of all, they're not your feelings. Not your feelings to own, to deal with. Even if it's great happiness, it's not yours. You are receiving external input. And that can be a distraction, but it's theirs, not yours. You're living in someone else's territory, if you will. And in one sense, it's deceptively easy. If you aren't happy with where you are or are hesitant to take control of your own life, to lock into what others are feeling gives you a sense of a life, but it's not yours. And at the same time, by being distracted by what others are experiencing, you're failing to take care of, address whatever's going on in your life. And that means you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to take charge of your life. You're depriving yourself of the opportunity to take care of your earthly responsibilities and your spiritual responsibilities. Recently, I read in one of the agony columns a recent bride writing and complaining because her husband was very seldom home after work because somebody always needed him. He'd drive halfway across town in order to pick somebody up because they needed some help or do this or do that or something else. And he was neglecting her. He was not addressing and taking responsibility for his own life or those he should have had more immediate compassion for. Now, unity, for those of you who are unfamiliar with unity, it is a metaphysical church or a metaphysical spiritual center. They define the metaphysical meaning of compassion, two different levels. One is divine compassion and one is human compassion. They say for divine compassion, in the heart of God exists an eternal tenderness and mercy for his children. Human compassion is defined a characteristic of love and mercy prompted by an understanding heart. A compassionate mind sees error but does not condemn. And then a quote from John 8, and this is right off their website. Neither do I condemn thee. Go thy way. From henceforth sin no more. Now, Sister Pepper, the bishop of the church from which we sprang, always often talked about the spiritual side and the carnal side, carnal being flesh-based or earthly based. And she differentiated in the sense that we can be earthly based, but then we lose the connection or our ability to grow in the spiritual side. And yet we have to acknowledge that there is our connection to this earth too, that we have responsibility to. The Bhagavad Gita of Hindu faith is fairly emphatic. They say that allowing yourself to be empathetic, to experience empathy, can damage your life force. Empathy creates attachments which draw us away from our spiritual connection and our capacity for compassion. Empathy can create paralysis. It can keep us chained to the now, chained to the limited. And then a quote I found from Krishna: do everything you have to with love, compassion, humility, and devotion. He who has no attachments can really love. Let me say that again. He who has no attachments can really love. Putting it in what we've been talking about, he who refrains from empathy can really love. To have compassion, to work in compassion, first, you must have compassion for yourself. With compassion for ourselves, we can heal, we have something to give. We are raising our level of frequency toward the divine. Lacking capacity, we'll tend to find ourselves stuck in empathy, stuck in attachments to the lower level of existence. And without acceptance, understanding, and patience, notice patience for ourselves, we cannot rise above the earthly bounds of empathy. Now, LIFT, the process I use to help people heal, actually has a couple of statements that fit right into that. One of the belief statements we like to see in people's software is, keep yourself safe and separate from the troubles of others. In other words, don't fall into the trap of empathy. Take care of yourself and have something higher to offer. And then make sure you're okay first before you offer or consider assisting others out of compassion. So you have to have your own anchor, your own attachment to the spiritual walk, to the divine, and thus less weighed down by the earthly, by the empathetic. Now, Baha'i has an interesting concept about compassion as well, and I'm going to quote this from one of the Baha'i websites. The source of compassion is the all-loving Creator, who, having created all things, continues to shower his bounties, even if one is undeserving, because he surveys his universe with the eyes of compassion and love. It is not only their fellow human beings that the beloved of God must treat with mercy and compassion. Rather must they show for the utmost loving kindness to every living creature. See that extension? Not just us humans, but every living creature is worthy of receiving compassion, of caring. Now, looking at it in the Christian tradition, traditional Christianity talks about how God, if you will, set it up for his son to be tortured and killed, to suffer on our behalf. Now, that doesn't mean that when we're going through tough times, God then suffers for us. It does indicate that he had the experience, so he has some sense of what it feels like to go through difficult times, to go through pain. But what he offers us is compassion. So he can sympathize with where we are with our sins, and bear in mind that the Aramaic translation of sin is to miss the mark. He has the compassion to help us find the way back to the path closer to him. He does not condemn us, but he also doesn't suffer for us. He has the compassion to provide us with the support, the guidance, the assistance in times of trial, the assistance as we seek us to grow higher in spiritual level, higher in spiritual frequency. And he does that just as much as he showers us with love and caring and all kinds of abundance when we are, in fact, on the path. So how about us spiritual seekers, where we don't necessarily follow any of the beliefs whether of Baha'i, the Hindu, traditional Christianity. I want to remind you from past talks about Father Richard Rohr and his writings about the cosmic Christ. And because we have so many new ones, I will sort of circle back here. Father Rohr is Jesuit, is he?
No,
Franciscan. Phil has actually spent time with him in the community, so she has a personal connection. But his theological thinking is well on the outside of traditional Christianity. And recently he wrote about his conclusion that, yes, there was a Jesus Christ, but separate the Jesus from the Christ, because there has been a cosmic Christ who has come to many of us, many different peoples, different places, in different forms, always carrying the message of divine love, of divine redemption. And we on the spiritual path, I suggest, should look to this as the model for that who can lead and guide us. In Unity, they talk about Jesus, the way shower. Well, the cosmic Christ was indeed and is indeed the way shower. The cosmic Christ, I will say, is reflective of that spark of God within us, as the Quakers believe, that loves us, guides us. If we listen, will show us the way to better represent the divine on this life, to move ourselves higher on the frequency scale toward Godhead, toward becoming one with the divine. Are we willing, each of us, to move that way and move in faith that way? With God's guidance, we have the assistance from his compassion and from the fact that he lives in each one of us to deal with, address any habits such as Fox was talking about that get in the way of our having the best divine result to who we are that we could ever have hoped to have. An assignment for you in your meditation, in your quiet time this week. Consider whether your spiritual walk is governed primarily or firstmost by your own commitment to lifting up your own life, understanding, connecting more with the divine knowledge, divine wisdom, lifting your spiritual frequency closer and closer to be able to merge with the divine. Or consider whether you're allowing yourself in your daily life to be distracted by the earthly issues, by empathy with those who are having their own struggles. If you're letting yourself be distracted by others, you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to be able to truly assist them as you move forward, because you have more light and love to offer them. And as you think about this, I come back to a quote from Proust. The greatest discovery is not finding new lands, but seeing with new eyes. This is what we are called to do. Open to God's compassion, open to God's teaching, even outside our normal expectations of what to understand. Let your eyes see new. And as you lift up, then let your compassion for those around you help them move forward.